assigned to me, I was in dilemma to pick between two important books. One was this book, which I have chosen today, Why Nations Fail, The Origin of Power, Prosperity and Poverty. The another one was The Fifth Discipline. Now, coming to the book itself, the book has been a very well-known book in the circle of literature because the authors of the book are very well-known, two economists. One is Darren Acemoglu and the other one is James Robinson. These two people are very celebrated economists, and their views are quite popular, and sometimes they invite equal amount of criticism among many other people also because of the stand they take in some of the issues. In this particular book, for the information of the House, this book was published in 2011 to 12, and at that time the issue of Arab Spring Revolution was very new, and therefore this book has a very small introduction on a preface kind of a thing for the 15 chapters that are part of this book. Actually there are 15 chapters, but the preface starts with something like dealing about the Arab Spring started by the Jasmine Revolution in the North Africa and the contiguous part of the West Asia. What happened was the public outrage was ignited by the self-immolation of one street vendor in Egypt, and this led to mass scale strike and lot of disturbance in the country. At the same time, what happened around 2011 January, President of Tunisia, Mr. Abidine El Ben Ali, had to resign. And then in 2011 February month, Hosni Mubarak was forced to resign, who ruled Egypt for more than 30 years. So what the authors claim is the Bahrain, Libya, Syria and Yemen, the future of these few countries are also little doubtful, and anything can happen. A kind of anarchy may come in. So therefore the whole discontent was because of the poverty, and the average income of an Egyptian is 20% of an average American, and the average lifespan 10 years less than an American citizen. So with this kind of contrast, the authors have started into the real chapters. The first chapter is very interesting. This holds the attention of all the readers throughout the book because based on this particular chapter, the author goes on revolving around several stories. Now the first chapter begins like this. The title of the chapter is So Close and Yet So Different. In this particular chapter, they have given the striking difference between two regions of Mexico and North America. This is the city of Nogales, which is cut half by one fence, and in the northern Nogales city, which is very prosperous, where the average household income is 30,000 US dollars, and to the south of it, where the Nogales Sonora it is called, the average household income is just 10,000 US dollars. The poor enrollment, poor health, all these things are quite stark, contrasting between the two regions between those two countries. Now, why I am referring to this particular issue with this much emphasis is, this is the storyline on which the authors go on building about the differences between the poverty, the prosperity, and also the power distribution. What the authors argue is the access to economic institutions of the America, where there is a choice of selecting the occupations or to acquire the schooling or to acquire certain type of skills, invest in technology, invest in employees and employers or their employment skills. All these things have defined the North American economic institutions, especially, have been formulated. Now the next question authors take up is, why are these institutions in the US are so much conducive to economic success, but why not in the Latin American countries, starting with Mexico, and even situation is not different in Brazil, Venezuela, Bolivia, Peru, Uruguay, Argentina, and many other countries. So for this, the authors go back to the history of the series of events. What happened in around 1490s, just before 1500, was the Spanish invaders went and settled in the South America, and they started extracting these institutional arrangements, wherein they captured the certain tribes and they wanted them to work under them, extract the gold and silver present in their countries, and they started exporting back to Europe, the Spanish invaders. Now, looking these things, the British people also got envious of these things. They also wanted to go there, but the situation was not congenial because either there was resistance from the local people or even the Spanish were not allowing them to do that. So in this case, what happened? The English people tried to find new areas, and that is how the march led by Columbus was landed in the American territory, and America was found. But from here, what happened? When they tried to replicate what the Spanish people did in southern part of the continent, the Latin America, extracting the local and the aborigines and the tribes, they tried to do that, but they were not very successful. Then what they did was they started bringing people from Africa through the sea route. Mostly they brought people from Sierra Leone, Democratic Republic of Congo, Zaire, and many other countries in the Africa. But the moment they were offshored in America, these people started fleeing to the northern part. Initially, they were coming there, and then when they found an opportunity, they were moving further north. Then these English people thought this kind of strategy may not work. What they did was they gave some incentive for engaging in the work. They told that if you are working with us, you will also share part of the profit. So this kind of sharing approach started the seed of institutionalization of the economic institutionalization. Subsequently, the social institutions were also molded on the same lines. Now, similarly, what happened in the South with the Napoleon Bonaparte's French army invading Spain, the Cadiz Constitution was brought, wherein the junta was abolished, Parliament kind of abrogated. At that time, there was something called as Cortes, wherein the constitutional monarchy based on the notions of popular sovereignty, that is, the power with the people, was enforced, and then the end of special privileges and equality before law was enforced. But these things were quite uncommon to several people, and they did not like this, and therefore the Latin American countries continued on these kind of small and short-lived incentives which were given by the Spanish people. And subsequently, what happened by 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte's that was the last war in which he lost. At that time, Napoleon Bonaparte's sovereignty was brought to an end. Therefore, the French, the Spanish and the French Revolution also started at the same time. Just before that, there was also a glorious revolution that happened in the United Kingdom. Now, this whole chapter conceives 2-3 important things. But besides this, he brings contrast to some of the important developments in both North America and South America, with the example of growth of Bill Gates versus growth of Carlos Slim. If we remember, Carlos Slim was the richest person at one point of time. He was even richer than Bill Gates. And but why Carlos Slim's richness was not celebrated, or why he alone himself could not sustain this, are also part of the discussion that the authors have gone on to discuss. What is the basis is Bill Gates made money by the strength of innovation, where the US Department of Justice also can file the civil action against the Microsoft Corporation in 1998 because the Microsoft abused the monopoly of power. So the author said this was the strength of US institutionalization of the free economic power. But what happened in Mexico is quite contrasting. Slim also became rich, but here what he did was he initially excelled in the stock market deals in buying and revamping the whole of the unprofitable farms. He became friend with the political leadership or the elite people of the country, and the major coup was established by the acquisition of Telemax. Whole acquisition of Telemax is an important gamble that Carlos Slim undertook, and then what he did after that was completely monopolization of the telecom industry, wherein in the North America the telecom industry was growing very fast. Carlos Slim was capturing this kind of a thing, and he was slowly controlling the whole of the telecom industry, and there were no other players to compete with him, and he eliminated all the rivalry. But the most important thing is there was no other mechanism either in Mexico or in any other Latin American countries to challenge this type of unworthy trade practices or illicit trade practices. Therefore, Carlos Slim went on to become rich. At the same time, people could not get the economic returns of the technology. Now, the next thing that comes into discussion is Carlos Slim, with the same mentality, enters into the US market. He fails miserably there because he simply tried to copycat what he did in Mexico. But the US federal court asks him to undertake certain free and fair trade practices, with which Carlos Slim very much knows that he cannot stand such a competition in the open market economy. Therefore, Carlos Slim was fined heavily by the US courts, and therefore he had to run away from the US. So this particular story is one side. The second important story, which I don't want to miss from the book, is between the contrasting difference between the North Korea and the South Korea. This particular thing has been very much highlighted in the second chapter, which is titled very aptly, Theories That Don't Work. So here what happens, 30 top countries, mostly the colonies of England are the beneficiaries of the Industrial Revolution. And the 30 bottom-most countries, which are mostly situated in the sub-Saharan and some of the countries in Africa, in Asia, and even in the erstwhile USSR or the Commonwealth industrial states, these are also there. Now, drawing the contrast between these top 30 and the bottom 30 countries, the authors try to put forth or evaluate the theories that are given as a reason for the difference between the richness and the poverty. Now, there is the first important theory, that is the geographical theory, where the theory is very, it is there from the beginning, which says that the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, the countries lying between this region are basically poor, and the countries situated in the northern part, especially the temperate part, are very rich. Now, for this, the authors try to understand or analyze the things. But what they say is, it has a certain substance in it, but they also give certain important contrasts. For example, Botswana in the African country appears to be quite rich compared to the Zimbabwe, which are just merely separated. For this particular region, he also goes back to that old story that I dealt in detail about the Nogales part, Arizona Nogales and Arizona Sonora in the North America and the Latin America. He says if geography is the reason for differences, there should not have been difference between Mexico and USA, and there should not also be a difference between Zimbabwe and Botswana, and there should be no difference between the North Korea and the South Korea. The second important theory that is given is the theory of cultural hypothesis, which says that The theory of cultural hypothesis was first given by Max Weber, a famous sociologist. But then he also goes back to the theories between the Protestant culture of the Christianity. But again, the authors negate it, saying that in Nogales, many aspects of culture are similar. And in North also, earlier, before the division, it was ruled by the same dynasty. There was unprecedented homogeneity between the two countries. Now, even in France, certain territories are not very, very prosperous. So therefore, the culture also has no role. Now, coming to the third important hypothesis, that is the ignorance hypothesis, in which the authors say that the richness and the poverty is caused by the ignorance of the policymakers to draw a sound policy for the development of the country. Now, Lionel Robbins himself is earlier proponent of the scarce economic resources, was also of this opinion, and this theory is floated since his time. Now, the third chapter, what they make is the making of prosperity and the poverty. They go further into the details of these things. So if you see the 38-degree channel, the parallel line between North and South Korea, the authors have given one important photograph in this book of the night hours. In the night hours, the South Korea there is a lot of lights and effulgent radiation emerging in the night. And he says that this is because of the very huge economic activity undergoing in the South Korea. In the North, there is a complete total darkness, except one place, which also belongs to Kim Jong-un's palace. That means there is a very contrasting things, and he has taken one important case study. At the time of division, there were two brothers who were separated. One brother went to the North Korea and the other went to the South Korea. After several years, 32 years, in 2000, a reunion was arranged between the South Koreans and the North Koreans who were separated at the time of partition. And the brother comes to meet the South Korean brother. The South Korean brother was a doctor and the North Korean brother was working in a military. Each of the brothers were under the impression that the other brother is very wealthy. But when the North Korean brother comes to South, he was very astonished. He asked why your condition is like that. When he opens his coat, he saw a very filthy dress inside. The coat only was nice one. And he says, this is also given by the dictator just to go and meet you. Once I go back to my country, this will be taken away again. So by hearing this, the brother says, when you carry some of these dresses along with you, you will be very happy for a few days. And you take some money from me, some offer, whatever he could do, he offers. But the elder brother says, no, better you keep these things with yourself. Because if I take them back to North Korea, these will be obfuscated by the rulers. So what the author says, the prosperity and the poverty have, besides these three reasons, they have the substance, but there are several other things that which he goes on to discuss. In this context, he draws upon two important things. One is the extractive nature of the institutionalizations, and the other one is the inclusive economic institutions. So in this thing, both the political institutions, the economic institutions, and the social institutions will evolve in a country, and therefore the pluralism and the self-sufficient centralized states are very, very essential. There are many other minute details. Probably only by reading the book, I think the understanding can be justified. Because, for example, what the authors say is, there is also an important element of balancing between a very strong centralized state, which is also inclusive in nature, but at the same time, there is also a scope for pluralism, which is a very, very difficult balance, which many states have failed to understand. And in the fifth chapter, which is a very interesting chapter, I have seen the future and it works. So I'll just read out this. If all societies are extractive, growth never happens. Is it so? No. Extractive institutions, by their very logic, must create wealth so that it can be extracted. What authors say is, if extractive institutions are a failure, then why it is there in some countries? Why only inclusive institutions are not existing? This is a question that he poses for the readers before going on. What he says is, a ruler monopolizing political power and in control of centralized state can introduce some degree of law and order to the system. This is what I was referring to when because to stimulate economy, some things are required. So from here onwards, the stories behind the First World War, the Versailles Palace Paris Act, the peace treaty, the present Woodrow Wilson, US president, and then the same was absent in Russia. And then the contrast between USSR, not USSR at this particular point, because around World War and after World War, what happened was Russia was in the old Tsarist regime, overthrown by the Bolsheviks. And subsequently, the civil war breaks out between the Reds and the Whites. And the Stalin and the Lenin era comes, and then the socialist comes, and all these things. It has been very amply described, but some of the things I think we also have to go back to the secondary sources that the bibliography has listed. Now, they also say that even in Lenin's and the Stalin's time, there was a growth in Russia. So there was development of industry by government, commanding of the resources, and then the heavy taxing of the agriculture land. And then this entailed the abolition of the private property. This is what happened in Russia at that time. But in the US, what happened? Same kind of, by this time, even by any standards, what is our understanding about democracy? At that time also, USA was not that much democratic. That's a different story. Authors are also very conscious to tell about that. There were no women rights, there were no blacks rights for several years, even after the first civil war that broke out. So the authors have given that account, but still they want to draw a comparison between the two strong rival forces at that particular time. And what they say is, except on one or two fronts, USSR was very much lagging and USA was leading. These one or two fronts were, one is the space, wherein USA was also trying to be the first person to land on moon, and Russia was also trying to be the first person to put the man on the space. So in 1956, what happens? There is a famous Nikita Khrushchev who says, "We will bury you." This "we will bury you" is referred to the US power. And they say that with the power of socialist movement, the capitalist forces, though they have not mentioned very much the capitalists, but this is only my understanding as I go into the reading. They say that "we will bury you" means we will win in terms of economic success. But now it is very well known as part of the history that the USSR could not do anything. Latest by 1977, leading academic textbook praised. And by 1978, what I mean to say is, till 1980s, this theory was there as a noted economist, Paul Samuelson, leading Nobel laureate economist, predicted USSR to take over USSR by 1984. That means in another 7-8 years, USSR will take over USA. This was the prediction made by a Nobel laureate economist. So, and in 1980, he again makes a revised edition of the same book, and he says that I hold on to my same assertion, but with the revised years of 2002 to 2012. In few years, we know how the USSR disintegrated into several independent states, and most importantly, as a child, probably this was the first time I knew USSR. In 1992, the Barcelona Olympics, USSR competed as a USSR. At that time, they led the medals chart. and all the member country representatives, they had to bid adieu to the Olympics ground with teary eyes, because they knew that in 1996 Atlanta Olympics, they may not participate as a USSR, but they have to participate as an independent country. So USA topping the medals list in Atlanta Olympics was known in 1992 Barcelona Olympics itself. So this was just outside the context of the book, but what it makes clear is, I have seen the future and it works, failed. So therefore, the policies of these things, even we know why after independence, our policies of going on with aligning with the socialistic type of things were criticized by some corners is for the same reason. Very shrewd people might have anticipated. There is no particular thing to contraindicate that USSR was a complete failure, but the book says that the seeds of the failure were there, but many people were not able to see this because the extractive nature of institutions in the USSR were very much there. And then many a times even this book gives a feeling that this is in favor of capitalism and capitalistic forces of market. But when you go on reading, probably the authors will give very small insinuations of justifying their stand. But personally, I feel that some more justification, or personally some more convincing was required to say that, because nowhere in the book they have mentioned how the market failures of the capitalistic economy have implications. These kind of things have not been discussed. Now, if I go on chapter by chapter, it's a very good, interesting read. But there is another thing like drifting apart. This is a very interesting read. At one point of time, Venice was most advanced and inclusive institutionals, and then now it has become a museum. We only refer these Venice in our cartoons and the children's cartoons, or only in our dreams we see that these fairy tales exist. But why these things evaded? Why this were drifted apart? So for this again, he takes about three important things. One is the Roman virtues, the Roman vices, and then the diverging paths. So apart from this, two important chapters are there. One is the turning point. The turning point in this is the very important book in the context of technology, because probably I was more mindful about agriculture technology when I was reading this chapter. In 1583, the sewing machine was discovered by William Lee, because he returned from University of Cambridge, and he saw the labor force engaged into the knitting, and it was very laborious job, and he thought that something should be done to help these people. But he approached the king. The king was not approving of his proposal to give this, to see this machine also, because he developed the machine and then he went to the palace. King said, no, this kind of chance we cannot take. This will take away the jobs from the people, and the people will become unemployed. This leads to a whole lot of disturbance in the society, and we can't take this risk. He wanders into several countries. He goes to Germany. He goes to all nearby European countries. He again comes back to England, and then he again appeals the successor rulers, the same fate. So why he tells is, with some resistance, he approaches some private people, and then forcefully this technology is floated among the people. Some people who are pro-technology, they take the technology and then try to replicate it, make another model of it and design this. Both the things happen. The joblessness in some cases will also happen, but the economy grows. And then England was quick to understand that technology can bring economic success. Along with economic success, it can also ensure the well-being of the large mass of the people. But the authors say, in the similar context, how this kind of technology would have been received in some other countries. which are not pro-reformist. And in the same thing, not on our turf is another chapter which discusses about the barriers to development. Same way, the Johannes Gutenberg, the printing machine that we all know, because at that point of time, the idea was to spread the information and communication. Again, for this also, there was a lot of resistance, because whoever adopted printing machine, they became very, very progressive. They progressed on education, they progressed on distribution of textbooks, they progressed on economic situations. But those who were against this printing press, they went on suffering the economic losses, especially the Arab countries. Because the first place where this printing machine was taken, even before many other countries, was the West Asia. And it was not received. And then we know the fate of many of these economies. And therefore, the fruits of industrial revolution is the reason for economic success. This is the hypothesis proposed by the authors. And now he lists out several reasons for this particular kind of thing. One is the absolutism, wherein some rulers are very absolutist in their nature, and then the weak political centralization. What authors say is, even with your good ideas, there should be some reasonable amount of centralized power so that the policies can be drawn based on the interest of the larger well-being of the people. And then the fear of industry, how you address this. And then the no shipping was allowed. For example, in China and the Sung dynasty, this particular discussion has happened. And in the reversing of the development in chapter 9, exactly the 1913 Land Act in Africa and the similar act which we read as part of our extension in the discipline also are discussed briefly. In this particular chapter, the authors are drawing some attention about India, where the English rule, how it was extractive in nature, how the taxation was imposed. So in fact, they take continent-wise different case stories. Now, after this development, how the diffusion of prosperity happens. If North and South Korea are just separated by such a small territory, why the prosperity did not flow? Why the prosperity of the North America did not flow to the South America? So in this chapter 10, he tries to address these answers. In this, there is one interesting story which I don't want to miss, because this will also bring some kind of chuckles on your faces, I am sure. What happens is, the sub-chapter in this chapter is titled as Honor Among the Thieves. What happens after 1707, the England, Wales and the Scotland, they all are united and they are called as the United Kingdom. And at that time, United Kingdom, the rule was any wrongdoer will be deported to America, the Northern America especially. And but what happened in 1783, America became independent. They became a separate country. And they said, don't bring convicts to our land. We are fed up with your convicts now. We don't want to carry your convicted people in our country. Now, these people tried to find some other option in other parts of the world. And the best part they could find was in the Northwest Africa. But when they started deporting the people to Northwest Africa, they observed that there are two important problems there. One is the malaria and the yellow fever. Because they are convicts. Anyway, the rulers would not have thought too much about that. But this is in the interest of these people. They said that even convicts should not be sent to these parts of Africa. So such was the intensity of those two diseases at that time. And what happened at the same time was, James Cook undertook an expedition to Australia and he found Australia. So therefore, they thought that it is better to put them in Australia. Australia is a very far off place. Out of sight is out of mind. So therefore, let us throw them away. In this particular time, there is one interesting case study which I think I should mention. There is one person known as Henry Cabal, and he meets another lady convict in the jail in United Kingdom itself. They fell in love with each other and they got married. But one person was deported to another country and another lady was deported to this another country. And then with the intervention of the Queen, these people were deported together to Australia. At that time, seeing their gentleness, Queen gave them some food and some parcel material. The food and parcel material that was taken with them by the captain of the ship was stolen by the captain of the ship when they reached Australia. Why he stole was the convicts had no chance of appeal, and whatever the claim of the convicts is cannot be heard in the court of the law. So with that confidence, the captain took away, and then what happened? They were in Australia. At that time, somebody phrased this word, which is very interesting read, new settlers. In order to align with the law, instead of convicts, they used the term new settlers, and they say new settlers will also have an equal opportunity before law. So therefore, there was one Judge Collins who said, I will not apply these laws of the British to the Australian land. And this becomes the first civilian case adjudged in Australia by the court of law. And what he says is, a convict was found guilty of stealing another convict's bread. So now the question of morality comes here. You are stealing some poor man's bread, and therefore subsequently Australia will become, there is another interesting read. One person, he goes on to challenge some of these things, and then he was William Bligh, one person comes and then he opposes. But after returning to Australia, the same Henry Cabal, who was a convict, he becomes an industrialist, and he owns a series of 9 hotels, and he owns 470 acres of land. What the author says, this was made possible because of the opportunity given to the convicts also, giving them equal opportunity of working, having given this opportunity of similar kind of work to any other people. These people establish the strength of hard work. So if the convicts were treated like convicts in the earlier time, probably this transformation would not have happened. So therefore, in the breaking the barriers, these things are detailed very much. And another interesting read from the book is the very interesting read on the French Revolution, how the French Revolution happened, the confluence of factors, the Louis XIV and the Louis XVI kings, and then fall of Napoleon Bonaparte and all these things. And one interesting recent or the modern kind of development is the virtuous circle, chapter number 11. This is very important because busting the trust is the one of the subtitle of the book, wherein the John Rockefeller, who was whom we call as the father of all these capitalistic forces, he started this Standard Oil Company and he eliminated all the rivals. But what happens at the same time, there is another term which Roosevelt coins. They are called as muckrakers. They expose the monopolies established by these industrialists. They are called as robber barons. And in this, what happens, most important development is the media plays a critical role. The muckrakers, in the form of assuming the media barons, they become very important voice for the people, and then they mobilize the public opinion against this, both Rockefeller and all these Privy League persons, and they take strong action against these trusts. In the name of trusts, they were doing a lot of monopolies and they were extracting the people. At the same time, the another subchapter discusses about New Deal in the US. If you remember, in the first UPA government, this New Deal was discussed in 2004 also in Indian context, but this has something different. Two things happens here. One is the industrial recovery, and the second one is the public works, in which the infrastructure is becomes the responsibility of the state, wherein US government pumps a lot of money so that they think that with these infrastructure, people will develop. But these acts were challenged in the court of law. Court did not allow. But Roosevelt wins the second election, and before the court gives the order, he comes up with another order, which is called as the Social Security Act, which we famously discuss in all the sociological context and the economic context. The Social Security Act, where the unemployment remuneration, the widow remuneration, the old age pension, the pension after retirement, all these concepts take birth in the form of Social Security Act. And the next chapter is the vicious circle, wherein he discusses about the cases in Guatemala, Ethiopia, Somalia, Zimbabwe, all these contrasting things. Again, he takes lessons from the first chapter. And the last important chapter for me, in fact, I'm not going to discuss on the 14th and 15th chapter. 15th I can discuss, but 14th, in this 13th chapter, why nations fail today. So here is another interesting story. He starts with how to win the lottery in Zimbabwe. Can you imagine how to win a lottery? Can you think something about how to win a lottery? Lottery is a matter of chance, but here in Zimbabwe, the president of Zimbabwe, Mr. Robert Mugabe, who has ruled and ruined the country for more than 35 years, he says that there will be a lottery on one day, and about 8, 9 or 10 years before, in the year 1990, whoever is having 5,000 Zimbabwean US dollars will be eligible to win a lottery. Probably there must be some few number of people to win that particular lottery. And the person who picks the lottery picks the name of the Zimbabwean president himself. Now, I don't want to tell, you will assume everything that you want to assume. So this is the state of certain countries under which the extractive institutions, where even you can win a lottery for yourself, being a president for 35 years. So this is how they discuss on why nations fail today also. In the today's context, he discusses. Now, in fact, I told the 14th is not required, but one important quick point is breaking the mold. What about China? Where does it fit? Whether it is having an extractive institutional policy or inclusive institutional policy. What the author says, with respect to politics, China is an extractive institution. But with respect to economics, they have the approach of inclusive institutionalization. Therefore, the Chinese growth has been stupendous. At least for the period they have written this book, this was good. But on 2-3 occasions, what I felt was, probably authors are hinting that Chinese dominance of economic power might come to an end in some time if they continue to follow the same policies of extractive institutionalization for some more time. And this is how they have mentioned. And the most important thing in the 15th chapter, the authors have tried to summarize. Probably this could have been little more elaborative. I found this chapter very, very small. Understanding prosperity and poverty. Why attempt to combat the poverty have failed? If we know everything about the poverty, if we know that certain things will help us to become prosperous, then why we are not successful in this attempt? This particular question is addressed at least in theory, and what they say is you cannot engineer the prosperity. In order to engineer this prosperity, you have to have three different approaches. And all these countries, both developed and the developing countries, have adopted these in different measures. One is the macroeconomic policies, wherein we concentrate on the macroeconomic aspects like the public policy and the fiscal finance. And the second thing is the microeconomic policies, such as the pressure, inflationary pressure on the consumer's purse. These things have to be taken care. Most important thing, the foreign aid. Because why I started this book itself was because of this, the foreign aid. Sir, in fact, we brought this book when we announced the FTF ITT training program on policy formulation, review and evaluation. And since then, I read only in bits and pieces at that particular point of time. Probably, but for this book reading chapter, I would not have taken this book out again from my racks. But it helped me. Why I am telling this fact is, they have established 2-3 important things on the foreign aid, especially in the context of Afghanistan. What they say is, the foreign aid should be purely used for strengthening the institutionalization of both economics and politics. But the people have misused the foreign aid just to benefit the people at power. So there are many other insinuations, and I don't know whether I have aroused the interest to read this book, or whether I have made the reading of this book redundant for you. But in conclusion, what I can say is, very interesting book and many insightful thoughts are there. In parts, it sounds little boring because, you know, the way we read Indian history, we feel little attached. But when you want to go on reading about some American history and the Europe history and the African history, it sometimes feels little away from the subject, but still you need to have one thread to hold on the interest. There is also another very small chapter on Japanese story also, which for want of time I just avoided. And I just also wanted to finish this book talk in 40-45 minutes time. I thank profusely the Director General sir and Krishnamurthy sir. In fact, I was not in a very positive mood to say yes when the book reading task was assigned to me, because it was just at the end of March. I thought if April also goes like March, probably I may not find time. And again, my own principle, the old principle of saying yes sometimes pays. And I said yes to you, sir. And probably I am the first beneficiary. Thank you very much for this opportunity, sir.